Wide receiver Chris Olave is an absolute shoo-in to lead the New Orleans Saints in receiving yards in 2025, but there are some other players that could get in on the mix. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we got the reporting dates for New Orleans Saints training camp, as well as the incoming 2025 Saints Hall of Fame inductee class. I'll get you updated on all of that. The New Orleans Saints also signed 2 players. Could more roster moves be on the way? We'll break down the 2 players they signed and what could be coming next. But we're going to lead everything off with a conversation around who will lead the New Orleans Saints in receiving yards in 2025, because Chris Olave is the shoo-in, the obvious answer. But there are some other players that will absolutely get in on the mix. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So yes, while Chris Olave is the absolute far and away runaway favorite to lead the New Orleans Saints in receiving yards in 2025, I did want to take a look at some of the other options that could potentially take that crown for this season. Look, this is going to be a new endeavor for the New Orleans Saints. What will Kellen Moore's offense look like? What will the passing game look like? How heavy in the passing game will the Saints be involved because of what their expected focus is going to be in the run game, right? We saw the Philadelphia Eagles last year through amongst the fewest passing attempts in 2024. Could we see the same thing in Kellen Moore's offense here in New Orleans? We'll figure it all out. But even with those fewer passing attempts, even all of that, you still have a player that leads your team in receiving yards. So I wanted to go through the favorites, the long shots, and then as well as the guys that are kind of right in the middle that sort of make sense as well. So the favorites are obvious, in my opinion. Tell me if you disagree. Chris Olave, who's already led the New Orleans Saints wide receiver room and led the New Orleans Saints passing game twice in the last 3 seasons with over 1,000 yards. He's the absolute favorite shoo-in, easy pick, easy option for 2025. Rashid Shaheed also right behind him just a couple years ago, over 700 receiving yards, has the big playability, can pick up chunk yards in no time. He's somebody that can, you blink, you miss him, and then all of a sudden he's over 100, 140 receiving yards on like a pair of catches if you're Rashid Shaheed in terms of all the big explosive stuff. But I want to dive a little bit deeper than just the favorites here. So we'll return to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed here in a moment, but I want to acknowledge kind of a concerning truth about the New Orleans Saints. The Saints have only had one player go over 1,000 receiving yards in the last 5 seasons since Michael Thomas had his record-setting catch season, which included 1,725 receiving yards in that year. The Saints have only had one receiver since then. That's 5 years. Go over 1,000 yards. And that was Chris Olave twice in 2022 and in 2023, his rookie and his sophomore seasons. If you go back beyond that, the Saints have not had a wide receiver. Actually, there's 2 things that I want to highlight in that. Out of those 5 years, if you remove Chris Olave, the remaining 3 years, more of those years were led by a non-wide receiver than a wide receiver. And in all 3 of those years, the Saints' leading wide receiver did not eclipse 1,000 yards. Why? Injuries, right? This is why I say injuries are not a new issue for the New Orleans Saints. It's something they've been struggling with, dating all the way back to sort of that 2020 season, I think was really the big one. But the 2020 season was also, the COVID season, and every team, had to play some game that they shouldn't have had to play because they had no roster and all those other things. Go all the way back to that Monday night game against Miami, for instance. They were moving every other game in the NFL, but for a reason didn't move that. But anyway, I digress. When we look at kind of where the Saints can be, if there are injuries at the wide receiver position, then that could put some other players in conversation for this role. So let's say that the Saints do have guys like, look, they've got Chris Olave, they've got Rashid Shaheed, both coming off of season-ending injuries, both having a history of injury as well. We'll see how Ted Rath ends up impacting those guys positively, how those guys in their offseason sort of changes or whatever it is that they've done, if they've done anything differently, how that potentially helps them out going into 2025 in terms of keeping them healthy. Saints also lost their director of rehabilitation, Jonathan Gress, to a college football team. So what impact does that have on this team? There's so many still question marks around the health and the potential of health for this team, hopefully trending in the right direction for them. But if they have issues at wide receiver with injuries to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, then I think a logical name to bring up as a sort of, not a long shot option, but another guy that makes sense is Brandin Cooks. Brandin Cooks is being brought here to help and be another one of those deep threats in this passing game. We'll see exactly what his role looks like in Kellen Moore's offense, but he's clearly excited about it. He has sort of the same kind of deep threat potential in terms of being able to pick up yards in a hurry that could potentially put him over if he ends up becoming the focal point of a passing game because of injuries at the otherwise top of that wide receiver room. So he becomes a clear option in sort of the middle kind of piece of these other options that are out there, favorites, guys that make sense, and then kind of the long shots. But we also have to acknowledge that Brandin Cooks has dealt with injury in the latter part of his career or in the latest parts of his career as well. So if there's injuries that strike all three of those players, then obviously we're going to start looking at positions outside of wide receiver. And that's where two names in particular stand out. Running back Alvin Kamara, as well as tight end Juwan Johnson. Now, Alvin Kamara led the New Orleans Saints in in receiving yards with 756 back in 2020. So this would not be a massive surprise to anybody, especially in this Kellen Moore offense that's going to do a lot with its players out of the backfield. Not just in the run game, though certainly in the run game, but also throwing to those players out of the backfield, utilizing them in those situations, I think is going to be a big part of what this Kellen Moore offense is going to be. It's also very comfortable for a young rookie quarterback or a young quarterback to have the options and the outlets to be able to throw to those guys out of the backfield who then can turn upfield and create. I think it's fair to say that we've seen Alvin Kamara be involved a little bit, maybe a little bit more in 2024, but a little bit less in years like 2022 and 2023 in the passing game. And certainly even still in 2024, less involved than he was in the 2020, 2021, 2017, 2018 types of years. And so getting him more involved in the passing game in Kellen Moore's offense would certainly be a benefit, but also makes it so that he's back a part of this conversation as a potential leader in receiving yards. We have to acknowledge that if Alvin Kamara or any running back leads this New Orleans Saints team in receiving yards, then something has gone wrong elsewhere. And that goes for the injuries to the wide receiver position, so on and so forth. Juwan Johnson, the tight end, led all pass catchers last year in receiving yards, but did so with just 548 receiving yards. That was just 5 more than Alvin Kamara, who also had his season end early due to injury last year. Otherwise, Alvin Kamara might have ended up being the leader in receiving yards again in 2024. But Juwan Johnson, not just because of injuries around him, but as a tight end that is going to be a big-time piece to this passing game. Kellen Moore loves the athletic tight ends. Juwan Johnson is the athletic tight end. So getting him more involved in the passing game feels like something that Kellen Moore will probably do from day one, as opposed to what we've seen over the past couple of years, where Juwan Johnson hasn't really become a focus in the passing game until the latter half of the season. I think he'll probably start in that place in 2025. So those are the kind of key guys that I think make the most sense. I do want to bring up one player, though, because I was not about to not mention Bub Means in this conversation. Bub Means looked really good through OTAs and minicamp. It would require injuries at the top of the position, but if Bub Means ends up being the healthy guy out of that wide receiver room, then he absolutely has the chance to lead this team in receiving yards, especially because in that instance, he doesn't necessarily have to top or eclipse 1,000 receiving yards, much like we just talked about with Juwan Johnson, as well as Alvin Kamara. And really, in some cases, if Brandin Cooks were to be that too. So I would absolutely put Bub Means on this list as a long shot as well. I'll mention Donovan Peoples-Jones, but got to see if he makes the roster first. Who else do you think could potentially be up there in terms of leading the New Orleans Saints in receiving yards? Let me know. But I think it's obvious that Chris Olave is the guy that everyone's fingers are crossed that he'll be healthy throughout the season and be able to get back to being that 1,000-yard receiver like he has been twice already in the last 3 years for the New Orleans Saints. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints doing some tinkering on their rosters. I'll introduce you to the 2 new players that they've signed and what could be on the way. We got that coming up as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at Monarch Money. I like to think about Monarch Money as my own personal Kai Harley that can help me out when it comes to managing all of my finances, but not just from a budgeting perspective or from a spending perspective. It's an all-in-one financial command center for you that also allows you to be able to, check all your spending, check your accounts, check your budgeting, all that kind of stuff, but also get involved in your investments and start managing and building your wealth. I absolutely love the Monarch Money app. Takes all of those 6 or 7 different apps that you would otherwise be trying to shuffle through and hope are updating and hope are not out of sync and all those other subscriptions that you're paying for and everything like that, and puts them all into one place, which makes it super, super manageable. You can even share with other folks who might be managing the same accounts as you and get all the stress out of your life when it comes to your finances. So take control of your finances today with Monarch Money. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com. You'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints hard at work, even though they're in their break between OTAs and minicamp and training camp, adding and tinkering and making some adjustments on their roster. And one particular adjustment has a little bit of standout potential for me, as the Saints signed 2 players from the UFL Spring League to add to their roster. We'll discuss each of those signings, starting with the one that I think stands out the most, and then we'll take a look at what could be on the way, looking at the roster numbers and where the Saints could be going next. So I want to start off here with Seth Green. Seth Green, the tight end, formerly of the Minnesota Golden Gophers, spent time with the Houston Cougars as well, and then eventually ended up with the Arlington Renegades of the UFL. Tight end, 6'3", 6'4", 240-ish pounds, but has a really interesting, let's call it eclectic skill set. And what he's going to be asked to do here in New Orleans is probably just play tight end. But he does have a very interesting and intriguing background. Before he landed with the Minnesota Golden Gophers, he was actually recruited as a high school quarterback. So he played quarterback for a long time. Then ended up in Minnesota, where they moved him to wide receiver, but then spent most of his time as a Wildcat quarterback, or as a little bit of a Wildcat wide receiver. During his time with the Minnesota Golden Gophers, he actually had more rushing yards than he had receiving yards. 388 rushing yards with Minnesota compared to just 83 receiving yards, which is really interesting for a guy that was a wide receiver, right? That was a wide receiver in Minnesota. So what it was is that he played a lot of Wildcat quarterback. They had him back there. He could throw some passes. He could not throw some passes. He could run. They could line him up outside, throw to him, all these other things. So they kind of used him in a bunch of different ways, but mostly in that Wildcat formation. So I know what's already popping at everyone's heads. Oh, is this the Saints' Taysom Hill substitute? I'm going to say maybe, because I'm not going to put anything past Kellen Moore, right? Kellen Moore is somebody that goes and wants to take things from social media clips from college and high school football plays and find a way to incorporate them and make them work in the NFL. He is a very, very innovative, energetic mind when it comes to all of that. So the idea that he could bring somebody in that has sort of this eclectic skill set as a former quarterback, Wildcat quarterback, pass catcher, and then not utilize him in that way is both not far-fetched, while at the same time being sort of I could totally see him doing that. You know what I mean? So I would not put it past Kellen Moore, although it does feel like as Seth's career has gone on, and I'm shocked that I haven't made this reference yet, but when we talk about Seth Green, I am talking about an actual football player, not the cha-ching robot chicken Seth Green, obviously, but I should make the joke. I should make the reference because we're all here in the same place thinking the same thing. But when he got to Houston, most of what he did in Houston, aside from throwing a pass here or there, was as a tight end and as a receiver. So he went from having 83 receiving yards during his time with Minnesota, where, by the way, he also scored 15 rushing touchdowns. So I want to be really clear about that too. Like, they utilized him in those 4th and 1 or goal to go situations, and he did it pretty effectively. I'm not going to lie. But then when he got to the Houston Cougars, no rushing yards. He had 3 touchdown catches, 157 total receiving yards during that time. And then when he got to the UFL, he was purely a tight end, 13 receptions, 159 receiving yards, and a touchdown catch as well. So it looks like he has already begun sort of a transition to just being a full-time tight end. But we'll see what Kellen Moore wants to do with him. I don't know. I'm not gonna give anybody any hope that he's gonna be a Taysom Hill clone or a substitute Taysom Hill for while Taysom Hill is hurt or anything like that, because it looks like he has more so transitioned over to that full-time tight end role. But we'll see. We'll see what it is that Kellen Moore does with him. So he is really intriguing and really interesting. The second player that the Saints signed was Barry Wesley, a versatile offensive lineman that's played left tackle. He's played right tackle. He's played left guard. Go back to his collegiate days at Colorado State. He even took 39 snaps in a game as a starting center at one point. He is a versatile dude, 6'7", big body, good athleticism, can move. He was a standout in the UFL as well during his time there. And he's a Lakewood, Colorado guy that bounced around all over spring leagues. He started off at first coming out of college and landing with the Massachusetts Pirates. Shout out to any Massachusetts Pirates fans out there from the Indoor Football League at that time back in 2022. He then landed with the, get ready for another throwback here, Seattle Sea Dragons in 2023 in the XFL when that was a thing. Then he landed with the Atlanta Falcons, landed on their practice squad, but then went to the injured reserve, the practice squad injured reserve for that season. Got a reserve future deal, but did not make the final roster, and then landed in the UFL with the Birmingham Stallions. Now, Birmingham Stallions went into the semifinals of the playoffs this past year, and during that time, you saw a lot of starts for the young man who played left tackle, left guard, and right tackle all throughout the Birmingham Stallions season, allowed just 2 sacks on 405 pass blocking snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, as well as just 11 total pressures during that time as well. So versatility, and really, I would say kind of, showing some effectiveness, some impact during that, spring league season, I think are the reasons why Barry Wesley now lands in New Orleans. Both these guys considered standouts in the UFL. So good guys to kind of roll the dice on. This is not a new practice for New Orleans. You were able to kind of see where the Saints have leaned into these developmental leagues, or they're not considered developmental leagues. I'm sorry, these spring leagues that should be developmental leagues for the NFL. So that's where the Saints have kind of been doing a little bit of work here over the course of the last 24 hours or so. Now, the Saints currently have 91 players sitting on their roster, but there's 2 kind of caveats to that. The first of which is that Charlie Smith, the kicker from Ireland that signed with the Saints last year, is on an international exemption. So because of that, he does not count against the 90-man roster. And currently, rookie quarterback Tyler Shuck is still unsigned. Again, not a surprise. Only 2 second-round picks across the entire NFL. I'm talking about the first 2 second-round picks, 33rd and 34th. Those are the only 2 second-round picks to sign. Everyone's waiting to see who's going to budge on the fully guaranteed second-round contract deal and see where things go as things move ahead. So I would expect that to probably be not solved until training camp begins, but we'll see where things go. It's really going to depend on the rest of the NFL because of how far down the list Tyler Shuck is at number 40. There's still picks 35 through 39 that kind of have to establish their precedent before anybody's budging at number 40. So we'll see where things go. But the Saints fine right now when it comes to where they are on their roster count. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at the New Orleans Saints reporting for training camps, which has been announced, and what it means for when training camps will begin, what we expect during that time. But we're going to lead everything off with a look at the New Orleans Saints incoming Hall of Fame class. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, the New Orleans Saints are memorializing 4 folks with the Hall of Fame, either as inductees or honorees in some events that will be held in December around the December 14th matchup between the Saints and the Carolina Panthers. But announcements were made on Wednesday about who is being inducted into the Saints Hall of Fame as members of the 2025 Hall of Fame class, as well as 2 folks that will be honored as well, including a pair of people that have simply been the most, or helped to create some of the most memorable moments in New Orleans Saints franchise history. So the two players that are going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Remember, they're not inducted yet. They will be in that around those December events. But the two players that have been selected to be inducted into the Hall of Fame are cornerback Tracy Porter, as well as safety Brett Maxey. And both of these guys, pinnacle, some of the best at their position to play for this team players in the franchise's history. I'll come back to both of them. The other two honorees that are going to be awarded every year, the fleur-de-lis honor goes out, which is the Joe Gamelli fleur-de-lis. If you don't know who Joe Gamelli was, you talk about a guy that was like big-time super fan, created the Touchdown Club, used to pay players fines and stuff like that. Like, used to raise money to pay players fines and everything. It was absolutely incredible, the stuff that he had done. And so they give out that that award every year to somebody that kind of just exemplifies and makes it, furthers the idea, furthers what it means to be a New Orleans Saints fan or to be a part of the New Orleans Saints, contributions to furthering the organization. And this year's honoree, without any hesitation, is being given posthumously to former WGNO sports director Ed Daniels. Ed Daniels, who of course was a Rummel high school grad, went to Loyola University as well, has been, done radio play-by-play for the team, has covered the team so closely, had been at his station since 1992. Everything, passed away a year ago at the age of 67. And it was this enormous thing and really charitable and just respectful situation from the Saints, where when he passed away, we were all in Los Angeles at the time because the Saints were doing their training camp in Irvine. And so they made sure that he was able to, that his family, they were able to get back home, right? And everything, and then be able to do services and everything here in New Orleans. And so just incredible gesture from them. And then now this next gesture of, honoring him with the Fleur-de-Lis Award. Awesome and inarguable. Really, really cool. Rest in peace to Ed Daniels. The other award that they're going to give is going to be given to perhaps the man that is single-handedly, or I guess two-handedly, responsible for the most important play in New Orleans Saints franchise history, perhaps, or maybe the most memorable play. I don't know. Tracy Porter, 74-yard pick six in the Super Bowl, obviously a big one, maybe number two. But man, Rebirth is special. It's memorialized in a statue outside of the Superdome. So this was going to Steve Gleason. The Saints actually, or the Saints Hall of Fame actually created the Saints Hall of Fame Courage Awards. This is the inaugural one. It's not going to be given away annually, but it will be given away sporadically in special cases. And this is obviously a special case. And so Steve Gleason is going to be honored with the Saints Hall of Fame Courage Award. And his acceptance speech when we were there at the facility, he said, "Thank you to the Saints Hall of Fame and committee for making up another award." And then he also ended his speech by saying, "Peace out, Girl Scouts," which I really enjoyed. I thought that was really fun. So there you go. Those are going to be your four folks that are going to be either inducted or honored on December 14th or around in events around the December 14th game between the Saints and the Carolina Panthers. I assume there will be some, halftime situation that happens with that, but there will be more events that happen around that week as well. Tracy Porter, of course, one of the best corners to ever play for the New Orleans Saints. The interception against the Minnesota Vikings in that 2009 NFC Championship game is what kept the Vikings from being able to march and get a field goal late, forced overtime, where Garrett Hartley was able to kick the field goal that sent them to, hell's frozen over, pigs have flown, we're going to the Super, the Saints are going to the Super Bowl, all that other stuff. Like, that happened because of that Tracy Porter interception. And then, of course, the 74-yard pick six during the Super Bowl that we already highlighted. Brett Maxey, number 4 in franchise history with 438 combined tackles, number 8, tied for number 8 with 15 interceptions. By the way, he's tied with Marshawn Lattimore and Marcus Williams, by the way, like recent additions to the team. Appeared in 118 New Orleans Saints games in the black and gold as a part of that stellar Dome Patrol defense. And so, obviously a guy that absolutely deserves to be in here as well. And then we talked about Ed Daniels and Steve Gleason, but those are the 4 guys that are going to be recognized in December. Tracy Porter, Brett Maxey being inducted into the Hall of Fame at that time, and then the honors going to Ed Daniels, as well as the late Ed Daniels, as well as Steve Gleason. So really incredible stuff there. Super cool. Really glad to get to be a part of the press conference for all that and where everything was going. So awesome stuff. The other thing that we learned on Wednesday is that the New Orleans Saints will be reporting for training camp on July 22nd. If that sounds weird, it's because typically teams will have two different dates. One date, usually a week earlier, the rookies report, and then the second date being when the veterans report a week later. And then typically speaking, training camp starts a day after the veterans report. They all show up, they get acclimated, they get, physicals and all this stuff or whatever it is that they do. And then bang, they're getting started with training camp the very next day. But Kellen Moore and the New Orleans Saints are going to have everybody report on July 22nd, which seems to indicate that July 23rd will be the beginning of New Orleans Saints training camp, which makes sense. Last year, their veterans reported on July 23rd, and then camp started on July 24th. So I would expect for Wednesday, July 23rd to be the first day of training camp. We will see, though, exactly where things go with that. Remember, the Saints will also be taking part of their training camp back to Irvine, California. No joint practices with the Los Angeles Chargers as we initially expected. Instead, they will just simply go ahead of the Los Angeles Chargers game and begin practices at UC Irvine, my alma mater, on August 6th. And then they'll stay there beyond the game, which is Sunday, August 10th through Friday, August 15th, before coming back before they close out the preseason with 2 games at home and open the regular season with 2 games at home. Pretty comfortable situation there. So there's all your updates in terms of what's going on with the New Orleans Saints from a roster perspective, from a receiving yards perspective, taking a look at the incoming Hall of Fame, as well as some of the other news around the team regarding training camp. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're just looking at the quarterback battle, the strengths of each quarterback, where each one needs to improve, and where things stand right now. Come back for that. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.